What if I told you the key to unlocking some serious innovation in the workplace, like really incredible stuff, isn't about, making everyone fit the same mold? Like, what if it's about embracing all those different ways our brains are wired?
Because that's what we're diving into today, this whole world of neurodiversity in the workplace.
We've got these excerpts from, let me see, in today's Evolving Workplace, reco.txt, and it really gets you thinking.
It digs into all this fascinating research about, really recognizing and supporting different cognitive styles, especially for folks with ADHD and autism.
It's amazing, actually, how recognizing those differences can lead to breakthroughs you wouldn't believe.
And to help us unpack all of this, we've got our expert here with us today. Welcome.
It's great to be here.
I'm really interested in how this piece connects to two other research papers: academic perfectionism, autoethnography, neurodiversity in academia, and mental simulation of the imminent future. Those two.
Right, and you've hit on something important. Those papers give us some really key context. For the longest time, so many workplaces, academic settings, they've had this, well, pretty standard definition of success.
Yeah.
And that often leaves neurodiverse individuals kind of, well, stuck.
It's like trying to solve one of those, complex equations using only addition. You might get somewhere, but are you really getting the whole picture?
Exactly. Think about something like the structure of traditional academic writing, that rigid format.
Right.
For some people, it works. But for others, especially those with ADHD or autism, it can be stifling.
Makes sense.
These are people who thrive on making those out-of-the-box connections, exploring ideas from all angles at once.
And that brings us to, well, this idea of pentacle writing that really stood out to me.
Sounds kind of like a magic spell, right?
But seriously, it really makes you rethink the whole foundation of like how we structure arguments. It's not just a straight line. It's more like, well, a pentacle. Ideas branching out, connecting in all these unexpected ways. I can see how that aligns with neurodiversity, but could you break that down for our listeners? How does that work?
Sure. What's so interesting about pentacle writing is it ditches that linear way of thinking.
Uh-huh.
It embraces a much more, well, interconnected approach.
Okay.
It allows you to enter a topic from all these different points. So it's less a straight line, more a web of ideas, right?
Yeah.
Now think about how many neurodiverse individuals process information they're making, these connections between things that seem totally random, jumping between ideas.
Right, right.
Pentacle writing just makes sense for them.
Interesting.
It reflects how their brains naturally work.
It's like we've been so busy forcing everyone to color inside the lines that we've totally missed the beauty of what happens when you go outside those lines.
Exactly.
And this isn't just some abstract theory.
No, not at all.
This has real impact on how we work, how we innovate, how we solve problems, everything.
Absolutely.
So how do we take this from, academic papers to the real world? Like how can understanding something like this pentacle writing help us create workplaces where neurodiversity can actually thrive?
That is the question, isn't it? And it's bigger than just pentacle writing itself, right?
Yeah.
It's about fundamentally shifting how we see and value different ways of thinking.
Okay.
We need to move away from this one-size-fits-all model and embrace flexibility.
All right, now you've got me hooked. Tell me more about how we actually do that.
Well, let's think about the mental simulation of the imminent future.
Okay.
You touched on it earlier. This tendency to mentally rehearse things that are going to happen,
Right.
it's common for neurodiverse people,
Uh-huh.
and it's often seen as anxiety, like they're getting ahead of themselves. But what if we could actually harness that?
Oh, wow.
Think about it. It's like a superpower for anticipating challenges.
That's actually a really good point.
It really highlights how what we might think is a weakness in one situation is actually a huge advantage in another.
So we're talking about like a real perspective shift, right?
Yeah.
Seeing these cognitive differences not as problems to fix, but like valuable strengths.
Yeah.
But how do we actually do that? How do we actually change things in workplaces?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that, one size doesn't fit all. What works for one person might not work for another, and that's okay.
Right.
We have to get rid of this idea that everyone needs the same work environment and embrace flexibility.
Okay, so like give me some examples. What would that look like? How can we actually make workplaces work better for all those different ways people think?
Okay, well, let's just start with the physical space.
Mhm.
Imagine an office that's actually designed with sensory sensitivities in mind.
Okay.
Quiet areas to really focus, ways to adjust the lighting so it's not overwhelming, maybe even like designated spaces for people to move around. They might seem like small things, but I mean, for someone who gets overstimulated easily, those things can make a world of difference.
Yeah, you said it. Fluorescent lights
Hmm.
and those big open office plans, not exactly what I'd call relaxing.
So I can definitely see how that would be a game changer. But what about the actual work itself? Like, how can we make sure things like performance evaluations aren't accidentally putting certain people at a disadvantage?
Right, that's where we really need to rethink how we define success, how we measure it.
Yeah.
Instead of just focusing on traditional things like meeting deadlines the same way every time or sticking to a plan without fail, why not value things like output, problem solving?
So it's about like recognizing that someone might take a more winding path to get there, but ultimately deliver something amazing.
Exactly. We need to recognize those unique strengths and create opportunities to let them shine. And that's where mentorship is so important.
Oh, interesting.
Imagine having a mentor who understands what it's like to think differently.
Yeah.
Someone who can give you guidance in a workplace that can sometimes feel, well, kind of overwhelming if you're not careful.
That is such a good point. It's one thing to make a more flexible environment, but it's just as important to make sure people have the support they need to actually thrive.
Right.
And that's where this whole thing about matching those neurodiverse strengths with company goals gets really exciting.
We were talking before about how someone with those strong mental simulation of the imminent future skills, they could be incredible, right?
Absolutely.
So for our listeners, can you give us a concrete example? Like, what would that look like in a real job?
Sure. So imagine someone with that kind of anticipatory thinking is, I don't know, leading a strategic foresight team. They're automatically looking ahead. They're spotting those emerging trends, the potential issues, before anyone else even sees them coming.
Wow.
Think about how valuable that would be. Risk management, coming up with new ideas, you name it.
It's like we've been looking at it all wrong. What we might have seen as different or even difficult is actually this like gold mine of potential.
Exactly. And it's not just these big picture roles either.
Oh, right.
Think about those who are amazing at recognizing patterns.
Yeah.
Data analysis, cybersecurity, anything where you have to spot those little inconsistencies or make connections others miss, they would be incredible at that.
That's good. We're talking about a whole workforce of Sherlock Holmeses,
Uh-huh.
each with their own magnifying glass.
I love that because it shows that neurodiversity isn't just about being different. It's about having a different way of looking at the world, a different set of tools almost.
Yeah.
And when we can actually use that, I mean, the possibilities are pretty much endless.
It's like we're finally realizing that the best ideas, the real breakthroughs, they don't come from everyone thinking the same way. It's about embracing all those amazing, different ways of thinking.
You got it. And this is where it gets really, really exciting.
Oh, yeah.
We've been talking about this in terms of work, right? But this goes way beyond that.
Okay.
When we understand and value neurodiversity, it changes how we think about education, how we interact with each other, everything.
It really is about recognizing that, like you were saying, what makes someone different isn't a bad thing. It's actually a strength.
Mm.
And if we can use those strengths,
Right.
imagine what we can do, not just as companies, but as a whole society.
Exactly. And it all starts with awareness, right?
Yeah.
We have to challenge those old ideas about what it means to be smart or successful. We need to look at the world through this neurodiversity lens.
So if our listeners walk away from this conversation with one thing, what would you want that to be?
That neurodiversity isn't just some trendy term. It's a real shift in how we see human potential.
Okay.
It means understanding that there are so many different ways to think, to learn, to just be in the world.
Yeah.
And those differences, they're not something to be afraid of, they're something to celebrate.
It's about building a world where everyone feels seen, everyone feels heard, and like their perspective actually matters.
Exactly. Not just inclusive, but a world that really truly celebrates what happens when different minds work together.
This has been an amazing conversation. So much to think about for all of us as we go about our work, our lives, everything. Thanks for being here for this deep dive, everyone. And until next time, keep those minds open, keep asking questions.